Alright, it's part 2 of the Rise of Bahamut set review, and that means we've got the Runecraft and Dragoncraft cards. So first off, we've got a card that seems to be pushing us towards a new archetype for Runecraft. It's Clarke, the Wizard of Mysteria, a 2-cost 2/2 with a fanfare of spell boosting a follower in your hand twice. So this card, and the other cards like it that we'll see in a bit, sort of push Runecraft in a new direction that I find quite interesting. See, Runecraft previously only really could be done in 2 different ways. You had the spell boost version of the deck, which heavily incentivized you to play as many spells as you could, because a lot of those spells had spell boost, and playing your spell boosted spells spell boosted your other spells that have spell boost, and so on, and that's how you wound up with decks that had like 35 spells in them. And then, of course, on the other side, you had the Earthright decks, where it's play your good Earth Sigils, play your good Earthrights, that's the deck. Sure, you had some variations with, like, PTP, but even that came in the Spell Boost variation and the Dirt variation, you know? Cards like Clarke actually push us towards building a follower-heavy Runecraft deck, using cards like Lightning Shooter, or Runeblade Summoner, or Wetchet Emulo, stuff like that. So, I'm very excited about this card. Time will tell about how the archetype actually shapes up, if it'll be good, if it'll be bad, if it'll be an aggro deck, if it'll be a mid-range deck, maybe it'll be both and they'll both be acceptable, who knows. I'll be trying out a few variations myself come release. Following along with that pattern, we've got Clarke the Arcane Scholar, a 3-cost 2/3 with a fanfare of spell boosting all of the followers in your hand twice. So, better effect, better body. I imagine that any deck that's running one will probably be running the other. Cool stuff. We even get some pretty good payoff for the new archetype in the Ogler, a 5-cost 3/4, which spell boosts to reduce its cost by 1 each time. Not the most exciting card in the world, per se, but he has a very powerful synergistic effect with the previous cards that I just mentioned. You can play Clarke on turn 2, and then this guy on turn 3, and that's a very high-statted curve that you've got there. You could even hypothetically play a spell on turn 1, Clarke on turn 2, affecting this guy, and then Clarke on turn 3, and that would spell boost Ogler 5 times, making him free on turn 3, and that has me thinking that aggro rune could actually be a thing alongside midrange, perhaps. So, good card, we'll definitely see play in the same decks as the previous 2 cards. Alright, so now we've got an interesting spell here, the Secrets of Erasmus. 3 cost, deal 5 damage to a random enemy follower, or for an enhance of 9, you summon Arch Summoner Erasmus instead. So, this is an interesting card. He starts up a new sort of pattern that Cygames is doing with this expansion, where they are taking bad legendaries and then stapling them onto enhance effects for cheaper spells. For those of you who maybe don't recall, Erasmus is an 8-cost legendary, who has deal 5 damage to a random enemy follower at the end of each turn as his effect, so you're effectively paying 3 for 1 use of his end of turn ability. Now, Erasmus doesn't see too much play, and the enhanced version here is strictly worse than putting Erasmus in your deck because it costs 9 instead of 8. On the other hand, the big upside is that you don't actually have to put Erasmus into your deck to play him. You can play a spell that actually does something in the early to mid stages of the game, and then if you need him in the late stages of the game, like maybe top deck this card late game, he's there to help you out. That said though, the fact that he's dealing his damage to a random enemy follower, I think kills his viability in something like D-Shift, where it's going to be tricky to actually get that damage to be where you want it to be. I do, however, see hope for this card in more follower-based Runecraft decks like the one that I was mentioning earlier, or perhaps even the Earthright decks, because they can actually set up board states where they can trade into the weaker enemy followers and then guarantee that you're getting the 5 damage exactly where you want it. So, interesting card, might make it into some lists, definitely at least worth trying out. And speaking of worth trying out, we have another spell here, the Piercing Rune. Now, this one's worded a little bit specifically, so follow with me here. It's 4 cost to deal 2 damage to an enemy follower, then deal 2 damage to the enemy leader. If an allied follower evolves, change the cost of this card to 1. Now, the reason why I was so careful about my wording there is because I think the way this works is that if this card is in your hand at any point when a allied follower evolves, it gets reduced to 1 and then stays at 1. So assuming that I'm right in the way that card works, that specific interaction actually gives this card quite a bit of additional flexibility. 1 damage spells are very, very important in D-Shift. There are plenty of times when you're comboing off that Angelic Snipe is deal 1 damage for -4 cost. And assuming I am correct, the idea that you can just hold on to this card after you've gotten it down to costing 1 after, evolving Merlin or something, and then wait for you to have all of your important cards in hand that you need to spell boost and then play it, gives it quite a bit of possibility in D-Shift. Aside from that, it's an obvious include in like an aggressive list, probably even makes it into mid-range lists just because it's so efficient for what it does. The part where it could be stuck in your hand costing 4 does suck, don't get me wrong, but I mean, even then, like, people do run Demonic Strike, and it's a pretty comparable sort of effect, so I have high hopes for this card. Alright, next up we've got the Disaster Witch, 6 cost 5/4, and as a fanfare she puts a Crimson Sorcery into your hand. And a Crimson Sorcery is the 1 cost deal 3 damage to any enemy spell that Levi puts into your hand when he evolves. So, thinking about it in aggregate, you can play her on turn 7, and then she is effectively a 7 cost 5/4 fanfare deal 3 damage to anything, potentially including your opponent's face. That's kind of comparable to like a Garuda. I mean, it's not quite the same thing because you're not popping one of your own amulets, but you're also getting a spell boost for playing a 1 cost spell, and the additional flexibility of being able to use it on an enemy follower if you need to, or hold on to it for later on the game, suggests that this card could be good enough. My only real hesitation is trying to think about what list it would actually fit in. D-Shift I don't think really has the time to be playing a 6 cost follower. Likewise, she might be a little bit too slow for an aggro deck, or not impactful enough for a mid-range deck, but, well, she might be good enough to make the cut. I'm just not 100% sure about that. And now we've got some Earthright synergy with the Professor of Taboos, 6 cost 3/5. Whenever an enemy follower is destroyed during your turn, summon a zombie, which is a 2/2, and at the end of your turn, perform Earthright Destroy a random enemy follower. So I think this card is incredibly fucking strong in basically any deck that would even think about running Earth Sigils. In the worst reasonable case, which is to say that you're playing him and you do have an Earth Sigil on the board, which I think is a very fair thing to suggest, he is a 6 cost 3/5 that summons a 2/2 and destroys a random enemy follower. But he can also just be so much more than that because it's any time an enemy follower is destroyed during your turn, not just from his Earthright. So you can play him, evolve him out, kill something with him, he'll probably survive because he'll have like 7 health, you'll get a zombie, then his Earthright triggers, then you get another zombie and kill another enemy follower, and you've got just so much value for not that much of an investment. And that's not even getting into additional synergy that you can get with followers on your board, or spells that you have in your hand. And then on top of that, he's an ongoing threat because he can continue to do the Earthright to destroy a random enemy follower at the end of every single one of your turns if he is left alive. Like, this card just seems ridiculously powerful, and I feel like if he doesn't see play, it's not going to be because he's weak, but because the rest of the deck will just be letting him down. So yeah, amazing card. He might just put the entire Earthright deck on his back and carry it by himself, or he might just get crushed under the weight of all of the other cards' inadequacy. We'll have to see. And now we've got what I think might actually be the best card in the set. You heard it here first. It's Daria the Dimensional Witch, 9 cost 5/5, fanfare, banish all the cards in your hand, draw 5 cards, and then spell boost the cards in your hand 5 times. And every time you spell boost her, you reduce her cost by 1. So, let's be real here, this card is just insane. So we'll start by looking at her in the context of an aggressive deck, where you're probably just going to dump your hand, you'll probably play a couple spells here or there, a Clarke here or there, get her down to costing like 5 or 6, then play her after you've dumped your entire hand, you basically just draw 5 cards for very cheap and are getting a pretty reasonable body alongside that. Maybe one of the cards that you drew was an Ogler, and then it costs 0 because it got spell boosted 5 times, so then you play that alongside her. Or maybe one of the cards that you drew with Daria was another Daria, so she gets spell boosted down to costing 4, you dump your hand again, you play another Daria, and just, oh my god, it's so ridiculous. So just obviously good in any kind of follower-heavy spell boost deck. A slightly more controversial opinion, though, is I think she's even good in D-Shift. On the one hand, yes, she does get rid of your hand, so if you're hoarding your Dimensional Shifts or Flame Tyrants, yeah, that does kind of interrupt the combo. But keep in mind that you don't always draw the cards that you need. Sometimes you don't get your Flame Tyrants, sometimes you don't get your D-Shifts, and in those situations, Daria is just draw 5 cards and spell boost them. And I think a draw effect that powerful and a spell boost effect that powerful is worth having, you know, an awkward hand every now and then. And that's not even getting into the Clown Fiesta scenarios where, for example, maybe you've got a cheap D-Shift and a cheap Daria in hand, but you don't have any Flame Tyrants, so you drop your D-Shift, you drop your Daria draws you into your Flame Tyrants, and maybe even a second D-Shift, and, well, you can see where the ridiculousness starts going, right? Aside from that, interesting to note that she actually banishes all of the cards in your hand, which there's actually very little reason for Cygames to do aside from making it so that she is not a viable card in PTP Rune. Pretty interesting that they were thinking about that. So yeah, I think she's a very powerful card, my personal pick for the best card in the set, and I expect we'll be seeing a lot of her. And I imagine that we will be seeing her alongside the other card that this character is featured in. Alright, and now we have what is both the last of the Runecraft cards and the first of the Dragoncraft cards, oddly enough. So strap yourselves in, we've got Anne, the Belle of Mysteria, as well as Greya the Dragonborn. They're both 8-cost 3/3s that then summon the other member of the duo and evolve her. So design-wise, these are a pair of pretty interesting cards in that they are kind of like dual-class cards, except that you need to collect them individually for each class. That being said, their differences in terms of both what you are getting without any additional investment, as well as their usage in the classes that they are available in, differs strongly enough that I'll cover them one by one, starting with Runecraft and then going to the Dragoncraft version. So when you play Anne in Runecraft, you're getting an evolved Greya, so you're effectively getting a 3/3 as well as a 4/4 with Rush that can attack twice per turn. While a double attacking follower with Rush is relatively decent, I feel like for 8 play points you can kinda do better. Then on the Dragoncraft side, when you play Greya, you're getting an evolved Anne, who effectively is giving you the same total stats, except that instead of double attacking, she does like an angelic barrage every time she attacks, effectively. That's a little bit better. A 1 damage AoE is not the most impressive thing in the world, particularly considering that the class already has Fafnir, but I think it's a little bit more relevant than a 4/4 being able to double attack. There's also the benefit that Greya kind of has synergy with what Dragoncraft wants to do as a class, in that she is a high-cost follower in a class that can ramp up into her, as well as reduce her cost, whereas the Runecraft version basically is getting nothing particularly synergistic out of that effect. There is something to be said about being able to evolve the member of the duo that doesn't evolve automatically, and I suppose the possibility of that, as well as the immense tempo swing that could potentially result in, means that a very controlling list might want to consider them. But all things considered, I think they're just a little bit too expensive for what they actually get you. Maybe the Dragoncraft version will see play, but I don't have much hope for the Runecraft version. So now moving into the Dragoncraft cards proper, we're starting off with a bang with Breath of the Salamander. 2-cost spell to deal 3 damage, and then for an enhance of 6, you then deal 2 damage to all enemy followers. So this is what I like to think of as a power level card. It's not really designed to create a new archetype or to give a weaker archetype the kind of tools that it needs to succeed. Instead, it's the kind of card where Cygames looked at the game, said, hey, Dragoncraft is underperforming, how do we fix that? And then they gave them this card. For point of comparison, the class already has Blazing Breath, which is 1 cost to deal 2 damage to an enemy follower. That card already sees play and is pretty decent all things considered. And while I suppose you could make an argument that you are technically getting less damage per play point, like 1.5 to your 1 instead of 2 to your 1. Like, shut up, nerd. This card owns. It's an example of an enhanced card where I think even the base version of it is good enough that if that's all the card said, if that's all it did, it would still see play. But then you actually look at what the enhanced version says, and what it effectively says is, for 6 play points, you're dealing 5 damage to a target as well as 2 to every other enemy follower. This card can go 1 for 1 with Otohime. You kill Otohime with the 5 damage part, you kill all of her followers with the 2 damage AoE, and that is amazing. I mean, sure, it doesn't, like, literally win you the game, but going 1 for 1 with one of the most brokenly powerful legendaries in the game is pretty goddamn impressive, I gotta say. I mean, I'm not even sure what else to say about it. It's just so obviously powerful that it feels like it's going to be a 3 of in perhaps every single Dragoncraft deck until the end of time? Probably even Face Dragon, honestly. I mean, they run Blazing Breath, and this just seems better. But anyway, let's bring things back down a bit, and to help with that, let's talk about Dragontamer. 2 cost 2/2, Fanfare, give an allied follower +1/+1 if Overflow is active for you. This is one of those followers where I'm just kinda like, yeah, that's pretty good, I guess. Dragoncraft already has a fair few 2-drops, and that's not even counting the neutral ones like Unica. I suppose you could think about replacing Mushusu with him in some of these slower lists. I think something like Face Dragon would want to keep Mushusu just because Mushusu can steal you games that you have no business winning off of like an 8 damage 2-drop. But in a slower list, I guess you could think about it. I mean, it's not like the most impressive card in the world. At most, you're getting 3 worth of stats on 2, which is like fine, but you have to wait until turn 7. I either want my 2-drops to be doing things on curve, or I want them to be doing completely broken things like Mushusu being 8 attack, you know? Still, he might find his way into some lists, I guess maybe. On to slightly more exciting things, we have Eyfa the Wyvern Rider. 3 cost 2/1, can't be attacked, and as an enhance for 7, she gains +2/+2 and Storm. So on the lower end, she is a worse Trinity Dragon, and on the upper end, she is like a mostly worse Forte, except that she has slightly more health, which might be relevant in some cases. The fact that she has 1 health by default is just such a downside compared to Trinity Dragon, though. Like, at 1 health, she just gets cleared up by an Angelic Barrage or any of the other AoE options that a variety of classes are getting in this expansion. And even if you evolve her, she just gets destroyed by Cudgel Priest or Dragon Warrior, which Trinity Dragon handily sidesteps by having 4 health, which is part of why it is such a good card when you evolve him. I suppose she might be able to replace something like Iron Scale or Imprisoned Dragon, which you're basically just including in your deck because you kind of want 3-drops rather than because of anything they really bring to the table. And she does have that flexibility to serve as like a B-lister Forte to help close out games. So she might be good enough to make it into some lists, but if there's a ton of AoE around, you might just think about replacing her with whatever it was that you replaced for her in the first place. And now we've got the Luxfang Kit, a 2 cost 2/1, and if this card is discarded, you summon it. So my mind immediately goes to the Silverware Golem from Hearthstone, which had a comparable effect, although it was a 3 cost 3/3 there. And that card did see some play in the discard-themed Zoo deck. But I think this card is a little bit better than that, despite the lower overall stats, because discard effects in Shadowverse are targeted specifically towards the lowest cost cards in your hand. I mean, obviously, if you're running a discard dragon card, you'll throw this in, but I think he's actually even good enough to make it into something like Face Dragon just because getting a free 2/1 can be such a powerful tempo swing. A lot of dragon decks already run Dragonute Scholars, so maybe this just slots right in, and that's all you need. Or, hey, maybe you just run a couple more discard effects to make this card a little bit better. It could work. So, yeah. Seems like a good card. If Discard Dragon is a thing, this card will see play. Might even still just see play in Face Dragon. Now we've got the Owl Guardian, a 6 cost 4/6 with Ward. And as an evolution effect, you randomly discard one of the lowest cost cards in your hand and deal 5 damage to an enemy follower. This just seems like a really good card in anything that isn't Face Dragon. It's a big fat ward follower that's only 1 stat point off curve, and a lot of time with followers like that you want to just evolve them anyway, so you might as well take 5 damage along with that too. A lot of the time he's going to be 3 for winning your opponent, and that's a lot of value to be getting when even on the lower end he's still a 4/6 with ward, and that is still pretty good by itself. So yeah, seems like a really good card. Moving on to another spell, we've got 5 cost Draconic Fervor. Gain an empty playpoint orb, draw 2 cards, and restore 3 defense to your leader. I sort of like the design of this card just because it's making up for the loss in tempo by restoring 3 defense to your leader, as well as making up for the loss in card advantage by drawing you 2 cards. That said though, I'm not really sure what type of deck this would be for. Dragoncraft already has ramping options, and I think that they are mostly all better than this card. I mean, sure, drawing 2 cards is nice, restoring 3 defense is nice, but is that really worth it for 3 extra play points over the option that Dragoncraft has had since release? I don't think so. So I don't really expect this to see too much play. What I do think we'll see a fair amount of play, even if it might not necessarily be good, is the Dragonclaw Pendant, a 5 cost amulet that says your followers, spells, and effects deal +1 damage. At first this just looks like permanent +1 spell damage for those of you familiar with Hearthstone, but it is so much more than that. I'll start off by saying that I'm not positive about how this works with just basic attacking, which is to say, if your 1 attack follower attacks into the enemy leader, will it deal 2 damage? I'd assume it works that way, but I don't know, so I'm just gonna leave that side alone. Obviously you can run it with spells like Breath of the Salamander to do a 3 damage AoE, and that's pretty cool, but I want to talk about something else. Let's talk about the effect part of it, specifically the effect of a little card called Wyvern Dragonoot. Wyvern Dragonoot deals 1 damage to the enemy leader every time you discard a card, and assuming I am understanding this card correctly, that would then get increased to 2 damage every time you discard a card. So let's imagine for a moment. Turn 5, you play Dragonclaw Pendant. Turn 6, you play 2 Wyvern Dragonoots, as well as Altered Fate. You discard 5 cards, your Dragonoots trigger 5 times each for 2 damage each, twice because there's 2 of them, 20 damage, boom, your opponent's dead on turn 6. Now, yeah, that's kind of a pie-in-the-sky scenario, but keep in mind, it doesn't have to be that ridiculous. I mean, just doubling the damage that you're dealing every time you Altered Fate with a Wyvern Dragonoot out is pretty goddamn impressive. So, at a bare minimum, I expect this card to spawn a really fun meme deck, and who knows, maybe Discard Dragon becomes a real deck, maybe this card becomes a mainstay in that deck. Or hell, maybe you're running it in a super control-y list and it makes all of your removal spells better, and then you just also have that combo as like a late game win condition. Lots of possibilities. It's a very flexible card, it's a little bit expensive, but I'm pretty excited to see what people are able to do with it. And last up we have Dragoncraft's Legendary, and it's more support for Discard Dragon, ooh boy! It's 9 cost Imperial Dragoon, a 5/5 with a fanfare of discard your hand and deal X damage to all enemies where X equals the number of cards you discarded. So this guy is just obviously amazing in any type of discard dragon deck. Even if you're only discarding, I don't know, 3 cards, 4 cards, this guy has an amazing effect. And on the upper end, he's like a guaranteed board wipe against all but the hardiest of enemy followers. Not to mention the fact that it is to all enemies, including the enemy leader. Maybe you reduce this guy's cost with the Wyvern Cavalier, and then on turn 9 you play Wyvern Dragonoot and then this guy, and you have 7 cards in hand and deal 14 damage to your opponent's face, and AoE their board for 7, assuming they're still alive. That's a really potent combo, and it's not even that impractical, I think. Do keep in mind though, with the Dragonclaw Pendant he'll only be dealing X plus 1 damage, not 2 damage per card like the Wyvern Dragonoot. So I have to admit, I'm incredibly excited for this card. He seemed really powerful to me, and he might be enough to propel Discard Dragon into being a real deck. In fact, he seems so powerful that I almost wonder if mid-range to controlling stylists will consider running him as well. I mean, being able to sweep your opponent's board and also deal a bunch of damage to the enemy leader all at once is an incredibly powerful effect for a control deck. It might be so powerful that something like Ramp Dragon starts thinking about including some of the discard synergy cards just to help take advantage of this card's powerful effect. I suppose that might be reaching a little bit, but it just seems like such a powerful, potentially game-ending effect that I think decks will have to at least consider it. I mean, with Dracomancer's Rights, you're not really dumping your hand. And hey, maybe that incentivizes you to run something like Dragon Council for additional draw. I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. So yeah, I think he's a very good card, and I'm excited to see what people are able to do with him. Alright, that about wraps it up for this time. In the next part, we'll be looking at Shadowcraft and Bloodcraft cards, so I hope you'll join me for that.